My name is Naveed Ehsan, and my special areas of interest are grammatical error analysis, linguistics, and business communication. I have been in the field of teaching for about 23 years, and I have taught English at school, college, and university level in Pakistan and abroad. Now, this course is called Linguistics 2, and in the first lecture, we are going to talk a little about the introduction to linguistics, what in fact linguistics means. Now, if you look at the slide, the first slide says the word linguistics. Now, it's derived from the Latin lingua, which means tongue, and istics, which means knowledge or science. Now, definition which we come across, of course, we have so many definitions of linguistics, but generally it is said that linguistics is the scientific study of language. Now, linguistics is that science which studies the origin, the organization, nature, and development of language, descriptively, historically, comparatively, and explicitly. Now, this means that we study language, the development of language, how the language originated, how it was organized later, what is in fact the nature of language, and how the language developed over the span of time. And we describe it, and again, historically means that we see the changes, we study the changes that have occurred in language over the period of time, and we also compare it with the other languages and see the changes or the similarities and the dissimilarities among between different languages. And we see it explicitly. This means that we take it as it is. We study it as a language in itself. Now, coming on to the second slide, we see that we have a quote coming from Robbins, who said that linguistics is concerned with human language as a universal and recognizable part of human behavior and the human faculties, perhaps one of the most essential to human life as we know it, and the most far-reaching of human capabilities in relation to the whole span of mankind achievements. Now, there are some words which need to be focused on this in this quote coming from Robbins, that human language is studied as a universal phenomena, and it is a recognizable part of human behavior. Well, it can be noted very prominently, the language people speak, the language humankind speaks, and it is one of the most distinctive features of the behavior of human beings and the human faculties. Perhaps, and he says, perhaps one of the most essential. It is essential to human life. Of course, we need language. Human beings need language to communicate, to survive, to fulfill their needs, which may be so many kinds of needs. And without communication, without language, the human beings cannot survive in this world. They need to fulfill the needs, and for that they need to communicate. And for communication, they need language. And it is one of the most far-reaching of human capabilities in relation to the whole span of mankind. It is one of the most important achievements of mankind. Language, learning a language and then using it effectively is one of the most important achievements of humankind. Now, this idea seems, now the language which the linguists mean here is a language in general. They do not mean a particular language. If, for example, we say that we are learning French or we're learning English, now this means that it's a particular language, it's a specific language. But in here, in linguistics, the linguists study language in general, the phenomena of language, without comparing it with other language, without giving references to other languages. Now, this idea sounds a bit abstract because it's very difficult, it's rather impossible to study language without references. We need to give references from other languages in order to study a particular language, or in order to study the phenomena of language. Still, even though if we do refer, the emphasis is still different. The emphasis of linguistics is still different. Linguistics does not emphasize practical knowledge or mastery of a particular knowledge. We do not say that we're studying a French language, we are studying English language, or we're studying Urdu language. But here we mean that we study the organization of language, how the language was originated, how the language is formed, what are the different components of language, what are the different parts of language, what are the different levels of language, what is the structure of language, a language in general. Now, there's a difference between a polyglot and a linguist. Now, a polyglot is a person who knows many languages, whereas a linguist is a person who studies language in general. The linguists may know one language, they may know many languages, or they may be studying language which they never know, because they are not studying the language in particular. They are studying the structure of language. They are studying what language how the language was formed, the formation of words, the sounds, the formation of sentences, so on and so forth. Now, they study the general principles of language organization. As I was saying, that how the language is organized to give it a meaningful shape, to make it effective, to convey effectively, and the behavior with reference to some actual language or languages. Now, any language can, for that purpose, if we are studying language in general, we can take any language. We are not bound to take one specific language, because we are not studying a language, we are studying about a language. We are not learning a language, we are learning about language, how the language originated, how language developed, how it changed over a span of time, how it was organized, how the sounds were combined together to make words, how the words were combined to make the sentences, and the sentences were given meanings, and later on, of course, the detailed passages were formed, like the discourse, and then the discourses were analyzed. Of course, we are studying the structure, the very structure, the basic structure, the essential structure of a language. Now, this is just like, let me give you an example here, a very familiar example. Now, if we think about learning to drive a car, we learn how to speak. It is just like learning how to speak a language. Now, if we are learning how to drive a car, we of course learn a set of rules, and we master it, we practice it. We learn how to turn on this ignition switch of a car, then we press the clutch, we put it in the gear. So this is a set of rules, or a set of principles, or a procedure. Now, we are learning a procedure, and definitely we gain mastery over this procedure by, of course, practicing it. But when we try to see how a car works, when we look at the organization of the parts of a car, we look at the engine, we look at different parts, how they are joined, how they are connected, why they are connected at certain places, and what will go wrong if they are connected in a different way. So this is what is learning the organization of language. Here we are learning the procedure. We are not learning what is how to drive a car. We are not learning a set of procedures how to drive a car, but we are learning in fact how a car works, how the different parts of a car work. And this is similar. Now you can compare it with learning the organization of a language. We can compare these two things with each other, because now when we are learning the organization of language, we'll be looking at sounds, we'll be looking at words, how the sounds, they are combined to make words, and how the words are put together, in what order they are put together, why they are put in a certain order, in order to make how the sounds are put together to make words, and how the words are put together to make of course phrases and sentences, and later on how the sentences are organized. Now this is in fact studying the very structure and organization of a language. So linguists in fact, they study the structure of a language. They are not looking at a particular language They are not looking at a particular set of rules, but they are looking at how these parts, or how different parts or levels of language they are developed, and they are also looking at the comparison, the structure of language, how it developed. Now, moving on, we can also say that language is a scientific study. We've already said that linguistics is a scientific study of language. Now, what do we do in a scientific study? We investigate the mechanism. In scientific study of language, we investigate the mechanism of language, its parts, how they fit together, why they are organized and arranged in a certain manner. And while driving car, we use its parts. While speaking a language, we use words, sounds, sentences, and of course phrases. Now, what happened in the earlier time? Let's go back into the history, and we say, and we see that in earlier times, the study of language was considered to be the study of grammar of a prestigious language, such as Latin, Sanskrit, or Greek. Now, they took a specific language, and they learned how to speak that language, and they studied how the grammar of that language is, and how the grammar is developed. And they used to take very prestigious, because in those times Latin, Sanskrit, Greek, and of course later on French, they were thought to be very prestigious languages, and the people who knew these languages were thought to be very learned people, and they were in fact the masters of oration, and they were masters of rhetorics. So they were thought to be very learned and educated people. So these languages were given a very high regard. So in order to study language, it was thought necessary to take any such prestigious language and then study the structure of that language. But today we think that all the languages, they are fit objects, because in fact we are not taking any particular language for a study. We are not taking any particular language to see the structure in linguistics. But we take any language because we are studying the structure of language. We are not studying how to speak a language, but we are studying the structure of language in general and giving its own right. Now, linguists study the languages in the world in order to. Now, let's look at some of the questions that linguists try to find the answers to. Now, what are the building blocks of languages? We see the building blocks, of course, in a structure. We have the small building blocks which are combined in a certain manner in order to build a structure. But in language, we see that the building structures are sounds, the very basic unit of language, sound, which can combine to make words, how the sounds are uttered, how they are uttered, and how they are received. So how they combine to make the words which combine to make the phrases or sentences. Of course, there's a certain mechanism, there's a certain system, there's a certain procedure for the combination of these words to combine into phrases and sentences. And then, of course, later on, when the sentences are given of course the words are also given meanings, and with certain meanings in mind, they are combined to make sentences, and then sentences they combine to make discourses, or the detailed texts which are later on analyzed. So these are the building blocks of one of the building blocks of linguistics. Now, it's a science in general. As we said, that linguistics is a science. Now let's look at what the scientists do in general. It's a science in general and specific. From both the aspects, linguistics is a science. Now, generally speaking, science is any knowledge based on clear, systematic, and rational thinking. For example, science of politics, science of cooking, science of driving a car, science of teaching. So there is a certain knowledge. Science is some knowledge which is clear, which is a systematic knowledge. There is a certain procedure to go about it. It's not taught. It's not at random. It's not haphazard, but there's a certain procedure and there's a certain order for all the scientific processes. And there is a rational thinking, there's a clear scientific thinking behind this order, there's a clear scientific thinking behind organization of this knowledge. So, science is also called a scientific study of phenomena, enabling us to state some theories and principles about the phenomena. Now, this is not just a study, but science, after systematically or logically studying this phenomena, it enables us to give some theories, some rules, some principles about the phenomena. And these rules, of course, they determine how how a certain phenomena works, or how a certain phenomena comes to an end through a process, through a series of different steps. Now, what do the scientists do? What is a scientific process? It proceeds by examination of publicly verifiable data obtained through observation and experimentation. It's empirical and objective. Now, let me tell you what is empirical and objective and what is done in the scientific study. Now, they start by the examination of publicly verifiable data. Means they take a phenomena, they take a certain subject, and then they make questionnaires, they distribute the questions, they conduct interviews through different techniques, through the primary and secondary sources. They collect data, and it's a data which can be pure, which is verifiable, which can be analyzed and verified later. And they may collect it even through observation, and then they conduct experiments on that. They analyze it through different means, and this data is of course objective. There is no subjectivity in this data, there is no personal opinion, there is totally objective data, and they take it from the sources as it comes. They take this data and they of course analyze it later, and then science, and then if we come on to the next point, science must also provide explanation after adequate observation of data. And this data should be, and this explanation or this theory or the statement that comes after the analysis of data, it should be consistent and economical. Consistent means that there should be no change in no difference between the statement that comes at the end of the analysis and the data. Both of them, they must agree with each other. And the statement must correspond to the data analyzed. And also economical. It should be concise. It should not be wordy. It should be concise, to the point statement which should verify the data, which should give us the results in the end, that yes, the results we collected through our survey, through our questionnaire, or through our experimentation, the results, of course, the results, they correspond to the data, and they prove what exists on ground. So this is like empirical data, the data which is coming through scientific means. Now, linguistics studies language which is objective and variable. Now let's look at linguistics. What are the linguists doing? When we say that linguistics is a science, then of course it must have the same rules which are applied to any scientific process. So it studies language which is objective and variable. Now, a language which is objective, as we said, that there is no subjectivity, a language as it comes, and of course variable, it can be changed looking at the demands. Of course, it is extendable. The language, as we said, that it's extendable and variable both. That it can be extended, it can develop, and of course it's also variable. The words change, the meanings change, and of course the sounds sometimes change. And this goes into the area of like the dialects or the pronunciation of words, and later on the dialects according to the region. So linguistics, they study, linguists, they study language which is variable, which can be changed. Now, it has a concrete shape and occurrence like natural phenomena in physical world or like organisms in the living world. Now, language is not abstract. It is a concrete shape. It has a concrete shape. What we mean to say here is that it is like a natural phenomena, like in the physical world we have any phenomena going on in this universe, or like any organisms which are in the living world, like you have animals, you have any living organisms in the universe. Of course, language also is like, it has a concrete shape and occurrence. Now, let's first talk about the physicists and chemists. Let's put here the example of physicists or chemists who analyze materials. Now, what do the physicists do or the chemists do? They may take some material, they may experiment on it. They, of course, what the chemists or the physicists, they are studying the shapes of those materials, they are studying the shapes of those materials, they may mix those materials to form new materials. No, this is what the chemists are doing in the labs, and finally, you know, they may come up with some materials which may be useful to humanity, or which may be which may assist humanity in any of the other phenomena or other activities. So like that, like a physicist or a chemist, what the physicist does, he takes the material, he does experiments on them, and finally comes up with a theory. Likewise, what do the linguists do? They study the components of language. They study the sounds, they study the words, they study the phonemes, they study the morphemes, the words, they study the sentences, the phrases, and they study how they are how they are formed. They study the word formation, they study the sentence formation, and for that, of course, they have developed certain means, they have developed certain procedures, they use their different theories, they use different techniques to study the combination of these words or sounds, and this to study the development of language. Now, why is language thought to be objective? Let's talk about that. Language is objective because it is observable by senses. Now, what do we mean by that? That we can observe language. Sounds a bit odd, but let's proceed. Can be heard. What do you mean that? What do we mean by that? That language can be heard with ears, or seen when vocal organs are in movement, or when reading words on a page. The words are visible. You can see the words with your eyes. And when somebody is speaking, the vocal organs, the throat muscles, of course, they can be observed. The tongue, the movement of tongue can be observed. The movement of lips can be observed. So this means that yes, language is objective because it is observable by senses. The senses can see somebody speaking. Of course, when you see somebody talking, when you see somebody moving lips, when you see somebody like the movement of hands. Now here we can also talk about the for example the non-verbal skills, right? Well, they are moving hands. The moving hands, sometimes they depict something. In different cultures, the hands, the gestures, the expressions, they have certain meanings. So this means when you see the gestures, when you see the expressions, you of course react according to that. You respond to the signal. So here, this example, taking this example, it becomes very clear that you can really observe and you can, of course, understand the language. There is a sign language as well, the language of gestures, the language of expressions. The language of gestures can also be, you have certain signs in different cultures, and those signs, they mean something. So you can get a response, the right response, through, or the desired response after looking at those gestures. So this means that yes, language is observable. Language is like a practical object. It is not abstract. It's not only in the air, but it is, of course, it can be observed practically. Now, this observation, what happens after that? This observation, when we observe that language is like a practical object, it can be observed, it leads to classification and definition. Now, what do the chemists do when they study certain object? They classify that object into, like for example, metals and non-metals, right? They of course have given a number of chemical, like in the periodic chart, they have given number of chemicals, they have given number of elements and compounds. When two elements join, are combined, they come up with the compounds. Like certain compounds are made. So they have divided or classified the chemicals into different classes, like the metals and non-metals, like of course the salts, the acids, the bases, the salts. So what are they doing? They are classifying, they are giving the different small ingredients of chemicals after experimentation. Likewise, what does a biologist do? After studying the living organisms, biologists of course has classified organisms into plants and animals. And then of course there's a further subdivision of these, like in plants there's also a further subdivision of plants. You have subclasses of plants, like also in the animals you have the subclasses of animals, the amphibians, for example, the reptiles, the mammals, the fish. So they are like you have the example of fish in reptiles, so the turtle. So what are these? They are basically subdivisions or the subclasses of the main classes, like animals and plants. So likewise, if we compare, if we look at the language, what are the linguists do? They also observe the features of language and classify them as sound features of particular types or words belonging to particular classes on the basis of similarity or difference with other sounds and words. Now here, linguists, they classify language. They have broken language into bits, into subclasses, and they classify the sound features also. They also have given the different particular types or words belonging to particular classes. Or this, even they have subdivided this, they have subdivided into the small up to the smallest unit, like a phoneme. And of course the study of phonemes, they have given a separate set of rules. They have given a separate system for study of phonemes, like the phonology, phonetics and phonology. Likewise, they are given classes like words. They have given classes like the sentences, the words and the nouns and the verbs and the adjectives. So what are these? Basically they are going to the smallest bit. They are looking at each word and then of course studying the structure of that word, studying the origin of that word, and of course subdividing those words into further subclasses and studying their and giving their meanings. So on the basis of similarity or difference, then of course they look at the similarities and differences between the words of one language and the words and sounds of the other language. And with that they come up with the development, how certain languages have developed over a period of time. So just like chemists, they are also looking at the essential structure of the language, because as we've already said that language is just like a practical object. Just like the object being studied by chemists, just like the object being studied by physicists. So language is also being studied, and linguists, they look at that language and further subdivide it. Linguistics also is a social science. It studies language, which is a form of social behavior and exists in interaction between human beings in society. Now, what do we mean by that? It's a social science. It studies language, which is a form of social behavior. Of course, human beings in the society, with interaction with different human beings, with interaction with people in the society, they use language. And they sometimes change the language, they sometimes use different words, they use different sentences, they use different gestures even, going on to, if we talk about the non-verbal language. Right. If we see that in a multicultural environment, we see that people interact with people from different cultures. And here, it is here that they need to learn the languages, the words and the sounds, or even the gestures of the other cultures. So they study, there is a social behavior. With regard to social behavior, they of course need to modify their language sometimes. They need to change the language, they need to learn new language. So it exists in interaction between human beings and society. Linguistics is also a study of the language that changes depending on the needs, depending on the requirements of human beings living in a certain society. People, they can't survive with their own one language. They need to change the words, they need to change the sounds, they need to change, even they need to use different words, they need to use different sentences, and they also need to behave in a certain way according to the needs and requirements in order to fulfill their needs and requirements in order to survive in that society. So this is what we mean by linguistics is also a social science. In social sciences, people interact with each other, they talk about different aspects of life, and for that they also meet people from different cultures and societies, right? And there they need to they need to use different words. Now, in empirical sciences, what is meant by empirical sciences? Methods of observation and experimentation known as inductive procedures. Now, inductive procedure means basically here that a phenomena is observed and the data is collected without preconceived idea or theory. Now, what do they do in empirical sciences? They directly observe a phenomena and they start collecting data without any idea or without any theory in their mind. They don't have any preconceived idea, they don't have a statement, they don't have a hypothesis. If we use the technical terms, or if we use the scientific terms, they don't have any hypothesis, they don't have any research question in their mind. They just start collecting the data. They are objective, very objective about collecting the data. They collect the data as it comes, and then they start the analysis of that data. They use different scientific methods to see the data, to analyze it, to see how how the people responded to a certain phenomena, how the people are behaving in a certain activity, and then later on, after analysis, then they come up with a theory, then they come up with a statement, then they come up with the result of that analysis. They didn't have any idea in their mind. Whereas, this is the opposite tradition, is the rational tradition, which is in fact the deductive procedure. Now, what do they do in deductive procedure? They first have a kind of statement, or the kind of a preliminary hypothesis, I would call it, or a theory in their minds. Now, they are clever enough to foresee, or maybe they build a certain statement or certain idea in their mind, and that their results, and then later on, then they collect the data and observe, they attempt to prove that idea, they attempt to prove that hypothesis by applying it to the data. If the results, they are opposite, they don't prove the preconceived idea, of course the researcher has to think again and maybe go to the start and and maybe redesign or rephrase the idea, or rephrase a statement which is a basic statement. Now, then when they are collecting the data, they have that idea in their mind, and if the data proves it, then of course they come up with the theory. The theory is formulated. In the beginning they had a statement, in the beginning they had a research question, they had a preconceived idea. Working on those preconceived idea, they designed different methods, they collected data using different methods, like they had they might have made questionnaire, they might have conducted a survey, they might have conducted interviews. They could be different. Through different ways, they keeping that idea in mind, they designed their questionnaires, and they also thought about the research procedures and used those research data collection methods. And finally, when that data the analysis of that data gave results. Those results, they proved their preconceived idea or their theory, their preconceived idea or the hypothesis, or they gave that data gives the answer to their research questions. So their theories, they come up with the theory. Now, if looking at this, the empirical scientists, we see that this method is opposite to the way empirical scientists operate. So that is why there was a criticism came from the empirical scientists that this is not an objective method, because when you already have a preconceived idea in your mind, all your data collection or all the procedure that comes after it may have some subjectivity, because you already have an idea in your mind. So your data cannot be pure, your data cannot be objective, because you may take all those bits which of course are suitable to your preconceived idea, and you may reject which don't suit your preconceived idea. This means that sometimes you are collecting data, and your question, you may not design a questionnaire in a way that you will not put such a question which gives the opposite result, or which goes against your idea. So there is a chance of subjectivity here. But some thinkers like Karl Popper, they observe that no observation can be free of some theory. No matter how much you are objective, you cannot observe anything. No matter how much objective you are, you cannot observe anything with no idea in you already have some concept in your mind, you already have some theory in your mind when you observe a phenomena. So it cannot be totally neutral. You cannot be totally neutral whenever you are conducting research. You do, like, it's very difficult to totally remove the researcher from the research, to totally minus, I would say, the researcher out of research, because there will be some idea would definitely be there in the mind of a researcher, or when he's observing something, definitely those ideas, they would come into play. So it can't be totally neutral. Now, moving on, what did linguistics do? There were two procedures. Now here, if we see linguistics, and if we apply the same thing to linguistics, we see that the two procedures were reconciled. We see both the procedures happening in the phenomena of linguistics, like in the study of linguistics, or in the phenomena which the linguists observe. Now, some aspects of language we see they can be observed easily, and they offer concrete instances of objective and verifiable data. Now, some aspects of language, they can be observed objectively. They are totally objective, and there is no subjectivity in that. Some phenomena, some parts, some aspects of language, and they are also verifiable. You can also verify them keeping yourself out or without any preconceived idea. But at the same time, a tentative or working hypothesis needed to explain the data. When we need to explain this data, when we need to analyze the data, we definitely need to have some tentative idea, some working hypothesis, some preconceived idea in order to explain this data, in order to analyze this data. Otherwise, it becomes difficult to analyze it without any framework, I would say base, without any base to move on, to proceed, or without any base to move further. Now, we may accept, reject, or modify. Now, this comes later. When we have already analyzed it, we may accept it, we may reject it even, and we may modify it even according to the idea, or according to the ground realities, or according to the situation. So it's not here linguistics embodies, or linguistics has both the types of procedures, the inductive procedures and the deductive procedures, and that is how the language is studied and analyzed. Now this alternation of two procedures gives us explanations which are exhaustive, consistent and concise, and this is of course the requirement of science. Now when we combine the two procedures, the inductive and deductive, the rational or the empirical scientist methods, we come up with explanations which are exhaustive and which are consistent and which are also concise. And this is in fact the requirement of science, that science at the end of any scientific procedure, at the end of any scientific analysis, we come up with statements which are of course consistent, which cannot be changed, which are exhaustive, which are in themselves, which give the final results, and which of course are not wordy, which of course don't talk about the irrelevant things. They are very much relevant and they are exact, accurate, precise and concise, and this is of course the requirements of science. Now here we can of course come up with a statement that linguistics is a science, because all the methods, the scientific methods, they are employed in studying a language. Linguists, they may use the empirical methods, they may use the deductive method, they may use the inductive method, but they of course operate very scientifically, they operate very accurately, they operate very logically, and in the end they come up with very logical statements, they come up with concise statements, they come up with consistent statements, explanations how the language has been formed and what are the different rules for the formation of words or sentences, and what is the origins and how the languages have developed over the period of time. Now, coming on to the conclusion, what is linguistics? This was the basic introduction to linguistics, into the basic things of the basic requirements for the basic features of language, the basic features of linguistics, what in fact linguistics means. Now we see that linguistics is both empirical science and a social science, because we've seen that the empirical methods or the deductive methods are used in analyzing a language, in studying a language, and a totally scientific procedure is used. It is also a social science, in that we see that language is studied in relation to its use in society. When the human beings, they interact, they live in societies, they interact with people, they use different languages, they use different words, and they of course keep on changing their language, they keep on changing their sentences, they keep on changing their ways of using language. So languages of course develop, languages change in society. If we move through the history, we see that language, many of the old languages are finished now, and they can't be heard. And now we have, even in one particular language, there are new words coming every day. Some of the words are obsolete. So we see that linguistics is also a social science, because it studies science in relation to its use in the society, in certain, and there is also a comparison. The languages of course are compared, the languages being used in different societies are again compared, and we see the similarities and dissimilarities, and we study the dialects, we study the way people of different societies, they use languages. So this proves that language also is a social science. Linguistics is a human discipline, since it is concerned with human language. Of course, human beings, they can't survive without using language. They have needs. The needs may be social, the needs may be personal, the needs may be physical, mental. For their very survival, they need to use language. And they need to interact with people. They need to satisfy their needs. They need to satisfy their desires. These needs, because of these needs and desires, they of course communicate. And they communicate because, as it is commonly said, that the human beings communicate because they cannot not communicate. This means it's difficult for them to stay quiet. They have to use language, they have to communicate, they have to talk, they have to interact with different people of societies, they have to fulfill their needs, and for the fulfillment of needs they need to use language. So it's a human discipline, because language is a human achievement, and language is a human feature. Human beings speak language, so a language, and they give meanings to the words, they give meanings to the sentences, so it becomes a meaningful phenomena. Language becomes a set of, there is a certain set of rules behind that, and of course there are rules for combination of words. If we go into detail, there are different rules for combination of sounds and words and sentences, and who is doing all that? It's the human beings who are modifying the words, who are modifying the sentences, who are who are giving different meanings to different words depending on the situations and depending on their needs. So since it's concerned with human language, it is a human discipline as well. It is a part or the study of humanities. Now, study of literature, appreciation of beauty and music, of poetry, all that, they come into the use of language, because when you appreciate literature, a piece of literature or a discourse or a paragraph, you are studying the words, you are studying the symbol, you are studying the combination of words, you are studying how the words have combined to give different meanings. You are also studying the rhyming scheme, you are also studying the musical effect of those words. Now, what are you doing basically? You are, of course, studying the structure of words, the structure of language, and the structure of those sentences. So in that, it enters the domain of humanities. What is the domain of humanities? They study literatures, they appreciate beauty, they even appreciate the fine arts. So all the when you talk about fine arts or poetry or music or beauty, you are using words. When you are using words, you are using language. So linguistics is also a part or a study of humanities. Now, in understanding language, humankind can understand itself. Now, when you are understanding language, since we've already said that linguistics is also a human phenomena, linguistics is also the study of humanity or the study of humanities. So when human beings, they interact with each other, they use the language, different language, and so whatever the language they are using, that language is a clear depiction of what is in their mind. And when we are studying the minds of people, we are studying human beings, we are studying people. Even if we analyze our own language, we are basically trying to understand ourselves. So when you study the language, since it's a human phenomena, since it's a human, it's a feature of human beings' behavior, so we are also studying humanity. We are also trying to understand what the human beings are. Now, since every branch of knowledge uses language, linguistics is central to all areas of knowledge. Every branch of knowledge, right, like sociology, like psychology, you have philosophy, you have all the branches of knowledge, they are using language. They are, because language is a medium of instruction. Now, any kind of knowledge cannot be conveyed without the use of language. So if the language has entered, or linguistics has entered, in fact, different branches or all the knowledge, all the different kinds of knowledge, all the areas of knowledge, because in order to understand a particular knowledge or a particular area, we need to, of course, understand the language as well. We need to understand the terminology. We need to understand the jargon. So when we understand all that, when we study all that, it becomes easy for us to study that particular branch of knowledge. So linguistics is now thought to be central to all areas of knowledge. It's being now taken as a separate branch, as a separate study of language, but then again we see that it has also entered all the other branches of knowledge. Of course, it doesn't depend on the study of other branches, but in fact all the other branches, we need language, we need linguistics, we need the study of language to understand the knowledge being conveyed by other branches of knowledge. We have a quote like linguistics has natural links with a wide range of academic disciplines. It has a wide range. It is now not restricted to a very close domain, but closed or restricted domain, but now it has a wide range of academic disciplines because it is used to study all the kinds of disciplines. It is used to study all the kinds of knowledge, all the branches of knowledge. Summing up today's discussion, we can say that linguistics is the scientific study of language. Which language? Language in general, not any particular language, because in this we are studying the structure of language, we are studying the formation of language, we are studying how the language operates, how the language works in different activities, in different aspects, in different phenomena. We are not studying about any particular language. Now, because we can compare it with the knowledge of learning a car, how to drive a car, as we came up with the example in the start, that learning how to drive a car, we can compare it with any particular language, set of rules to speak any particular language. And learning how the car works, the engine, the parts of the car, we compare it, of course, with learning the structure of a language. Now, then we said that linguistics is a science from general and specific aspects. Now, how it is science from general aspects? That it gives us statements which are precise, which are extendable, and which are, of course, variable. Language is prone to development. Language is prone to change as well. That it has developed over the period of time, and it has also language also changes. Looking at different, looking at the demands or looking at different situations, human beings, they change their language, they change their tones, they change the accents, they change the words, they change the meanings, sometimes for fulfilling their needs. And then we also said that language is science from empirical point of view, from specific point of view. Here we talked about the ways and methods used by empirical scientists, that they use deductive method, they observe a phenomena and they collect data which is verifiable. After collecting data, they of course analyze that data and they come up with a theory. Whereas we also saw the rational method, in which a certain preconceived idea is already there in the mind of researcher, and from that idea, of course, he builds up the methods to collect data and the methods to research on that phenomena, and of course prepares different things about different methodologies, decides about his methodology of way of operation or methodology for research. The researcher may conduct surveys, may make questionnaires, the researcher may conduct interviews, and then of course would come up with a theory. These two methods, definitely they are being employed in research. So and then we finally decided that, well, linguistics is a science from both the aspects, that it embodies both the ways. Some of the aspects of languages, they can be observed objectively. They can be observed without any personal opinions, and these phenomena you can explain you can analyze the data without any preconceived ideas. Then we saw that no phenomena can be totally objective, because definitely when you are collecting data, when you are conducting research, some idea is already there in the mind, and in the end, when the when you come up with the results, these ideas, those results, they may verify your idea, and that is why it embodies both the kinds of methods. So Finally, we said that linguistics is a science, and linguistics has entered different branches of knowledge like humanities, like social sciences, and in understanding a language you are understanding humankind, and because it's a human phenomena, people need to use language to survive in the society, to fulfill their needs. So when you are studying language, you are studying basically humanity, and linguistics has entered every branch of knowledge. It is central to all the areas of knowledge. So this is what in brief we mean by linguistics, that it studies basically the structure of language, the formation of language. It doesn't study any specific language. It doesn't study how to speak. It doesn't tell you the ways how to speak a particular language. It tells you how a language in general is formed, what was the origin of language, how it was formed, how it developed over the period of time. So that's all what we had about the introduction to the linguistics. For today, this concludes today's lecture.